it's 3:30. It's 3:30. I'm going to go ahead and give everybody about 1 minute to get on. I think there's a few people we're still waiting on possibly. So we're going to start in just a little under a minute. So let's go ahead and get started. I know we had a couple people who were reserved to be part of it, but haven't shown up yet. They might join us here in a few minutes. So I am Charles Loftin. I'm presenting the day with my colleagues, Dr. Christina Fieber and Dr. Kristen Robinson. We're going to talk about online science classes and how we moved them online. We were a little lucky in the fact that we actually moved some of our anatomy courses and some other courses online before the pandemic actually hit. So we kind of had a nice blueprint on how to do this. So what I'd like to start with is kind of a talk of how we began this process, and then some things we've done since then to kind of make it all work a little better. So if at any point you have a question, you can add it into the chat. We will address them at the end of this, or you can just hold on to your question until the very end. If at any point you have any kind of issue hearing me or seeing the screen, if you would just enter into the chat, and either myself, one of my co-hosts, or the administrator will notice that. All right, so what I'm going to start off with is talking about sort of some things we did with our LMS. We use D2L, so you'll see images of our D2L site. So you'll notice that there will be differences if you use Blackboard or Moodle, but all of these have very similar capabilities. So there's some suggestions we're going to add about what we did with our LMS. Pretty simple stuff. And we're going to spend a little time talking about third-party programs that help us do this online lab. Dr. Robinson's going to talk to us about synchronous online, and Dr. Fieber is going to talk to us about lab kits for at-home use, and when the changes we had to make for some hybrid labs when the students started coming back from the pandemic last year. So let's start with how we move things online. So like I said, before the pandemic ever hit, we had already moved some of our anatomies online. Prior to last year's pandemic, or which I guess still going on, we had 2 anatomy courses that were online. So you had the option to take them online. Before we could ever start doing that, we realized quickly that we were going to need a database of images. So whether it's anatomy like I teach, or any visually intense subject, if you're going to recreate it online, you're going to have a gigantic photo archive. And so we began creating that. The reason I say that, for anatomy, we use models and dissected specimens. You can't exactly have someone cutting up a cat at home, and the models themselves are very expensive. Anatomy models run anywhere from hundreds to thousands of dollars for an individual model. So we wanted the students to be able to view the same thing the students could see in a face-to-face class. That's the way we thought was fair. At our school, we kind of feel like the students should have the same experience online as they do face-to-face, or at least as close to that as you can get. We all know that, you know, it's never going to be the exact same experience, but they should have the same experience as much as you can provide. So one of the things that a lot of online courses do, they provide pictures like you see here on the far side of the screen, the cartoon image. This is what most lab manuals have in them. A lot of times this is, you know, not always the best drawings. I mean, this is a nice drawing, but sometimes they're not as accurate as you'd like. And more importantly, they're not the same thing the face-to-face students will be holding in their hands in a lab. So again, this is why we went through the trouble of creating all of these photos. So we took hundreds and hundreds of photographs, and we took all these models at different angles using very good cameras. Our digital arts department helped us out by letting us use some of their material. because we didn't all just have these nice cameras sitting around. So we took all these photographs, and again, different angles, and we created for our department sort of a photo library so that a professor could go in and kind of decide what they wanted to use in their course. We also had a standard, I guess you could call album of photographs that most people kind of use, but we actually have, like I said, hundreds of extra photos, even beyond what's the traditional used ones. And there are all these different models and all kind of different angles. Now, the reason we needed that was the main reason we had to have a way of testing these students. We wanted to test them. We wanted to give them the exact same test and the exact same models that their face-to-face counterparts would get. So first thing is visual testing. Once we had this photographic database, we could then start creating tests. So again, this is the quiz feature in D2L, but it's a similar feature in Moodle and Blackboard as well. So we uploaded the photographs, and as you can see, you can just simply label that. And it's very similar to how a lab practical would be in, face-to-face classes. You would have your model and you'd have what you want to identify flagged and pinned. The only difference, instead of having a sticker on this, we just have a label, a digital photograph label. So the photographs were important for a few things. One, it gave us something to teach with. The teachers can now teach with all these photographs. They can make their lessons. It gives the students an atlas to use so they can study all of this. And it gave us something to use during our testing. Now, it also proved very useful for something else we decided to do. I know everybody's kind of on the OER bandwagon lately, and we joined in with that a couple of years ago as well. And we created our own lab manual for one of our anatomy courses, and we're actually doing that now for our other ones as well. That's still a work in progress. But the hardest part of that was creating all these photographs. It's very time consuming. So my takeaway point for this lesson, if you gain nothing else, if you want to do a visually intensive subject and you want to do it online, the thing you might want to start with is the most time consuming thing, which is getting this photo database together, because it does take a while. But our OER material, it went quite smoothly because we had this rich database. Our testing, when we went to, all this online testing because of COVID, it was easy to switch the other courses online because we had this photo database. So we were very lucky in the fact that we had already created this prior to the pandemic. And again, I would stress that if you are planning on going online with a course and it's going to have a lot of imagery, get that photo database started soon, because that is the most time consuming thing you'll do. At least for anatomy, it was. Now, the next thing is, since we're kind of talking about what we loaded into the LMS, let's talk about the LMS a bit. Whether, again, you're using D2L or some other learning management system, one of the things we recommended, and actually I shouldn't say recommended, we asked all classes to do this, we kind of require it, is when you have an online class, the first week you should provide links to everything they're going to need to really get started in your course. I know that all of this is located in the tabs within your LMS, but we all know that students during that first week, especially for whatever reason, they're very hesitant about getting in and just diving into a program and learning how to use it. So I would highly stress that if you're not doing this now, adopt this policy, or at least try it out one semester, because when we started putting these welcome messages with all the information and quick little links to how to get to it all, we started noticing that the students quickly got into the course. Things went a lot smoother, and that first week's important. The other thing we started using was what's called a dashboard. Now, not all of us use this, but I keep a running dashboard going on the front of my course all the time. That running dashboard, as you can see here, is basically common things they'll use. Again, all of this can be found in your content, but one of the things I found is students, they're just not that good, some of them, about navigating the submenus that are within some of your content items. So some of us began using items that constantly stay on the front page. or some people might post up a weekly message for this. But this has been helpful because it kind of reminds students of what they need to do and how to find things very quickly. One of the items I started using very soon was checklists. When I first started doing online classes, I didn't use checklists. I would encourage everyone, if you're not using a checklist in your online classes, try it one semester. I noticed a huge difference in completion of work when I added the dashboard, and then an even larger increase in completion when I added sort of a weekly work checklist. So the weekly work checklist is what it sounds like. It's literally just what you do each week. But by dividing a course up this way, the students are able to quickly go through and do their work, all right? I noticed a lot of students before we started using this would just say, oh, I missed that. And, you know, it always baffled me how they missed it, but they did. Again, these are simple things to do, but I wanted to talk about it since we're talking about loading all these photographs in the LMS. These are two very simple tips using a checklist, using these links on the front page that have greatly helped me, because for the online students, a lot of them, they're nervous about it. I think they get so nervous sometimes they don't, you know, look the way they should or read the way they should in the content. So by having the most useful stuff online on the front page, it really has helped my courses. So, and also keep in mind that in the content, everything that is available on that front page should still be in that content area. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the third-party platforms. We have a little video that's kind of play, so as I'm talking, don't think that I actually write that fast, okay, in my classes, but it's on a little kind of sped up loop. So one of the things I noticed early on is that students didn't seem to enjoy or pay that close attention to voiceover lectures when it was just voiceover in the PowerPoint. I'm not really sure why, but when I started doing lessons like this, where I was writing and talking and, you know, kind of in the moment, they actually seemed to get more involved. And I guess the videos were less dry as well. But one of the problems I ran into is that we didn't have, you know, my computer didn't come with the software to notate my slides like this as I went, you know, if I were teaching live. So this program you're seeing here is called Edu-Creations, and it's the word education, the first part of that word, and the word creations combined. So Edu-Creations. And that program is one of many like it that allows you to lecture and notate at the same time as, you know, you show these images. And I think the students like this better because it makes them feel like they're back in class. It's sort of like you're in class and you're writing on the board the way you would back when things were normal, right? So I noticed an improvement in grades and watching of these videos when we started doing it this way. And you might think, well, what's the difference between this and a voiceover PowerPoint lecture? And the truth is there's not really one, but for some reason this seems to connect better with the students. And I think it's because it does mimic the feel of being in the class and writing on the board. It seems more normal to them. So to get our courses online, let's recap. We made a photo database. We kind of organized our LMS, I'd say very streamlined, and then added things on the front page so they could find it very easily. And we started making videos and try to make videos that made them feel more connected. But even with all that, the biggest problem of taking a science course online is how do you create or recreate the online lab experience? And for that, we actually had to use a third-party program called Connect. So Connect by McGraw-Hill is what we have here. And again, I'm gonna let this video play. So I've been kind of giving a lot of anatomy examples. This here is a video loop from a microbiology lab, but they have these for general biology. They have these for anatomy. They have them here, as you see, for microbiology. So what this is, as you can tell, is a lab simulation. It's kind of like a lab video game, boring video game, but a video game nonetheless. And they can go through and basically recreate what they would do in lab. And if they were to, in this case, do the wrong step at the wrong time, the program would stop them and tell them what they did wrong, or ask them, what are you doing wrong? Same way you would do in class. The nice thing about this is if they mess up, you just click a button, you don't have to throw anything away. And the cleanup is much easier on this than it would be doing this in real life. But this program enabled us to actually do lab online. I mean, it doesn't matter how many pictures you've got, or how many tests or quizzes you make, or how many videos you make, unless you can recreate these lab experiments. There's many science courses you cannot do online, but programs like this enable us to do that. Now, that being said, Connect has a great library of these virtual labs. However, there are some that I wish they had and they don't. But for those, we have found that we can kind of supplement it with activities that we create. And by supplementing with our stuff plus theirs, we have found over the years that we have been able to create an experience where the students that at home are getting the exact same level of involvement they would get at the actual campus. And, I've had students who took my online class and then come to my face-to-face, and they perform just as well as the students who are always face-to-face. That being said, all of this does take a lot of coordination, a lot of time to set up. And unfortunately for a lot of people, when the pandemic hit last year, I know a lot of people were kind of just thrown into the online. So a lot of people have probably started adopting these things, but like I've said a couple times, we were quite lucky in the fact that we already had this done for 2 of our anatomy courses. So for the other ones and our other science courses, we could kind of follow the blueprint. Now, for the students who just don't like only being online, for the students who miss that interaction, students who ask a lot of questions, they don't like having to email their questions in or call the professor. Our asynchronous students, some of them let us know that they were interested in being involved more, being able to ask questions in real time. So we started doing a synchronous lesson. And I'm going to let Dr. Robinson take over and talk to you about synchronous online classes.
Hey y'all, Dr. Robinson here. I hope you can hear me. I apologize. My camera is doing some weird flickering jig today. So something I have learned during the pandemic, to roll with the punches and just keep on keeping on, right? So I'm excited to talk to y'all today just basically of how the synchronous lab worked, what those logistics were, how our students were involved and engaged with that, and then the benefits and challenges that came with this modality as well. So just how the lab rolled. Basically, we had Microsoft Team groups set up for each individual class, and those would meet at their particular day and time every week. We cover that same material in online classes as we would our face-to-face classes, as we would these synchronous classes. And like Chuck was saying, students could ask questions. I could answer them right there in the moment. We could all see each other. It gave us that interactive feeling that our students and we as faculty don't get in the asynchronous, fully online classes. Our students seem to really enjoy this setup for those that jumped on board with us through that experiment stage. Again, it allowed them to see and interact with each other, as well as with us as their professor. When we were in teams together, the professor could use these model pictures that Chuck was just talking about, that we put in PowerPoints for them so that they have access to them, not only in the time that we were meeting face-to-face online together, but also as study tools. Once they had logged off away from us, they could still go back and see the exact same pictures that we had done kind of as like a preview for them when we were on Teams. We'd go through that introduction of material, just like we would do at the beginning of an actual lab session when we were on campus face-to-face. We could highlight, we could draw over those, just like Chuck was demonstrating a few minutes ago. We tried to do the whole hold the model via the videos when we were all logged in together, and we found out very quickly that the students couldn't see the details we were wanting them to see. So we kind of resorted back to these awesome pictures that we had as a department. For most of our labs, no matter what science we were teaching, we would require a weekly lab quiz. So something we figured out with synchronous learning and asynchronous learning was, how are we going to quiz them? And Chuck mentioned it earlier. These pictures were ideal for weekly lab quizzes. So we would put those pictures up there, have the line and a number. They would have to type out the answer so that they could practice the spelling with, you know, the certain muscles, parts of the eye, whatever it is we were asking them. And that quiz would be due before the next week's lab. So it's kind of like we would quiz them on that week's material. They would turn that in before we would do new material the following week. When we had to recreate lab activities and materials, we used the combination of resources that we had, whether it be in Desire to Learn, our D2L platform, whether it be in McGraw-Hill's Connect. But when we were able to use those programs, again, students could receive that same exact material for every lesson to do activities from home. And again, many students, like many of us, were having to multitask. They either had children at home, they were working a variety of jobs, they had various school schedules. So they found this very, very helpful. McGraw-Hill's Connect, their virtual labs, again, it allowed students to work through the material more after we had already given them the overview together in our Teams meetings. Just as a side note, totally different ballgame for all of us that have been used to being in an actual lab with actual hands-on experience in those labs with models, and then not to have to clean up. Like Chuck just said, microbiology is a big deal. You pull out all those supplies, you do the experiments, you have to put them all back. A&P, we pull out models galore, we wipe those suckers down and we put them back when we're done. Again, a totally different ballgame when we had to go to the synchronous learning. But our images and labeling of those images came in super handy. Again, quizzes as well as learning for our students. Some of the challenges that we faced, really, it kind of goes to what I was just saying. Anatomy labs are very visual. We have them performing certain activities. Like one of our favorite labs is doing cranial nerve labs, and they have to work through various activities for them to realize, hey, I used that cranial nerve to do that. So once again, we went back to our photographed high resolution images of every single model that we had. We uploaded the labeled and unlabeled version of these PowerPoints in D2L so that students could see and study those exact same items as the counterparts that, let's say, were in an actual lab with us. It's a lot more difficult, again, if we were trying to hold up a model via Teams video versus being in a lab and having our hands on that model, moving it, pointing to the same thing I'm pointing to. But we found again that our pictures, oh my goodness, made a huge difference in our students' success. We not only had our models, but we also had all of our microscope slides, which you might have seen one earlier in Chuck's quick video, drawing lines all over it. They could still go through, study those variety of tissues, basically for every lab that we did have slides as a part of, and that we would pull out for our actual labs. As far as lab activities, like I mentioned earlier, virtual labs for McGraw-Hill, they were those digital simulations that allowed them to do great activities, but it's more or less like a video game. It's not like your hands are actually in it, truly feeling, seeing, and doing. However, flip side, we felt like that was our best alternative. When they weren't having those hands-on, hey, let's do as close as we can to letting them see everything that we would normally use. As far as benefits, really, I feel like the biggest one was our students had more flexibility. I mentioned earlier, a lot of them were multitasking just like many of us, with their children right there next to them 24/7 because they weren't in school either. So the flexibility was huge. Even though synchronous classes, we had meeting at certain days and certain times, that flexibility wasn't as high as an asynchronous online class, but the synchronous gave those students a lot more connected feeling. So again, it was that in time, real time, talk to each other, see each other, ask questions, get those questions answered. We found out pretty quickly, once students knew they had the synchronous option, that they were very hesitant to do an all online science class. So the synchronous options did that whole, hey, I can meet one day a week for however long so that I'm not completely feeling like I'm on my own. And last but not least, I am huge on every semester to get students feedback. I do what I call it a Dr. RCC, Dr. Robinson constructive criticism. And I ask students, what did you like? What did you not like? What are other suggestions you would give me to try with my future students? And in the last year and a half, I added to it the whole synchronous online. What were your feelings, thoughts? And here were the pros and cons directly from our students, very similar to what we as professors found as well. But in the pro category, they really liked still interacting with their classmates. Some of them were able to, form study groups that way that they wouldn't have done if it had been an all online class. I purposely was able to bring in some minutes to review some lecture material, even though it was considered lab time, so we could spend more time in review if the students needed it. Again, they got answers as soon as they asked the question. Students were more engaged. I would go over lab material out of their lab book before I would even kick off that lab. That would kind of be how I would start from the previous section. They all responded and took turns answering those questions. It still brought in the whole real life of, hey, I got to be on time because she's taking attendance. So I need to be logged in before she actually begins. We did notice the improvement of student learning outcomes, and so did the students. Again, I think it helped being able to ask those questions and getting answers right then and there. They loved being able to work ahead when we would allow them to do so. And again, they liked, even though it wasn't fully flexible as an all online class would be, they still found it a lot more semi-flexible versus having to show up to class. As far as cons, they did miss the real life interaction. They felt like this, though, was as close as we could get. So I think we all appreciated that in the end. Again, time schedules got tricky with especially those that were parents. But most of them, if they had an issue, they would send me an email. Hey, I'm going to be like 2 minutes late, but I promise I'm coming. Which, of course, I totally understood. They did have to figure out the whole pace of learning, make sure they had that time management, which I kind of consider a pro as a professor side, but they found it more as a challenge on their side. They would have some technology issues from time to time. Some of them had internet issues. If they didn't have high-speed internet, they would have issues with my images either uploading while I was drawing and showing it right then and there, but then it would catch up later while I'm on like 5 images later. So I did make sure at the beginning to, hey, make sure your internet's, fairly good. If not, call your company, because a lot of them were working with college students at the time, really any students, to try to give them a better deal to upgrade or what have you. Still, they had some schedule conflicts. Their kids were logging on to their certain timed meetings that they had to get in. At the same time, they were supposed to be on with me. So I always stressed communication was the key. And then just some students flat out told me, I do best if I'm in the classroom. So overall, we found it to be very successful when we had to shift stuff as far as still interacting and connecting with the students the best that we could during this trying and challenging times, and definitely a time of learning. But I appreciated being able to experiment with Chuck in this regards, just to see how it worked out. And again, I think in the end, it was a better plus and full of pros and benefits than challenges.
All right, so I'm going to take over and I'm going to touch briefly on what Dr. Robinson just shared. We did in general biology, we also tried out synchronous instruction, but we found that in general biology, it worked better for us to actually have lecture synchronous than lab synchronous after the first semester that we tried it, because the lab is so experimental. We moved into using lab kits, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment, but then did synchronous lectures. So face-to-face lecture, not face-to-face, but virtual, in real time lectures. And a few of our bio faculty found that to be general biology to be really an advantage over the online delivery when we didn't have an option. And for those students that really did need to be in a classroom and needed to be meeting with their instructor face-to-face, asking questions in real time, that actually worked out really well. So we had a lot of positive feedback from synchronous lectures in general biology. So for the lab kits, so for some of our subjects, they're very experimental, where you need students to be able to develop a hypothesis, run an experiment, use a microscope, those sorts of things. And we found that the virtual platforms that we were utilizing, Connect was one of those, and by no means am I, is this a negative in terms of what they offer, but we felt that there was a lot of just click, click, click going on through the programs and not as much learning as we really wanted to happen as far as the students getting the gist of the scientific process of learning how to develop a hypothesis, design an experiment, those kinds of things we really were struggling with, especially for our transferable science courses. So Bio 101 and 102 for us, the Chem 110, Chem 111 for us. So there was an issue there initially. And the first couple of semesters, we just didn't feel like we were doing enough when they had to move online. They'd never been taught online before. Those courses, they'd been taught as hybrids with the lecture online, but the labs had always still met face-to-face. So we were in no way prepared to move them fully online. We were actually in the process of developing a fully online Bio 101 when COVID hit. So we had started thinking about it, but hadn't actually enacted anything. So the first course that we moved to a lab kit with was our basic biological sciences 1, Bio 101. We have kept that going through this summer. We started using the kits last spring. We've used them this summer. We now have kits going into place for Chemistry 110 this fall. 2 different companies, actually. We're using Carolina Biological for Bio 101. We're using Hands-On Labs for Chem 110. We just found there were better options for different disciplines from different companies. So we looked into that. The nice thing about the kits for Bio 101 that we selected, we were able to go in and pick the labs that were the most hands-on, that we really felt a kit would benefit the student. And we picked kits that came with microscopes. And the funny thing is when I got my kit, I was, so excited to open the kit. Of course, I'm a science geek and play with a microscope. So, I was in my office opening the kit and getting the scope out. It's a good little scope. We were really surprised. I was worried that it would be more like the toy scopes that, I've encountered with my children along the way that you can get from a toy store, so to speak. No, it's a good little microscope. So I was quite impressed with that aspect of it. And our faculty picked those really, like I said, hands-on labs. And then we supplemented because we already use McGraw-Hill and Connect for lecture. So we did some of their virtual labs for the ones that were easier to do virtually, like genetics, for example, which is more of a paper-based lab in the lab anyways, where you're doing Punnett squares and working through, chi-square, that kind of thing. We were able to use then the digital supplements for those labs and the lab kits as well. So we did a blend of them, and the less experiments we chose in the lab kit, the less labs we chose, brought the price down obviously too. So we had to find a nice balance with price. They are expensive. That was a concern for us. It was an added cost for sure for those students. We're actually looking now at lecture OER options to kind of attenuate that lab cost, because we are finding that the kits are beneficial. Another thing that has to be considered is shipping time. Our bookstore carries the vouchers for the kits. So students pick up the voucher, order the kit. Luckily, Carolina ships from North Carolina to us. So it's a couple of days turnaround time, but we've now gotten into the process of contacting our students the week before classes start, those that are registered already, and letting them know, hey, get a voucher, order your kit. So it'll be there that first week. We do our first week with a virtual lab, the first week or two actually with a virtual lab, to try and cover that shipping time to help the students out. So there are some things like that that we had to really consider and we had to really work with. So another piece of this with the lab kits is that our faculty all got a kit. We made sure that every faculty member had a lab kit, and most of our faculty that were using those kits then were able to run through the experiments. I know I taught with a co-faculty member who she was teaching with the lab kit. She videoed herself doing the labs with the kit, not the full lab, but showing the students, okay, these are the materials you're going to need for the photosynthesis lab this week. This is what we're going to be doing. This is the time you're going to need, and you're going to have to plan this out. So she would have little 10-minute videos preempting that week's lab to show them what they need to use, what they need to prepare, if there's any household kind of materials they need, what they're going to submit. We also had to think about students sending us pictures of their lab setup at home. That's something we began to require, because we found that some students were trying to not order the kit and use, their neighbors' information, their online neighbors' information from, the experiment. So we required them to submit their own photos to prove they actually did the lab. So a photo of their lab setup along with their sheets where they documented their data or their lab report or whatever the assessment piece may have been for that given week. So the picture was a requirement for attendance for us. So that was something that we had to work on as well. All in all, I think it went really well. There, again, there is some concerns about cost, but I think for a lab where this digital simulations just didn't meet what we felt we needed to meet, I think the lab kits are a really good option. So. Okay, the other thing that we had to really look at was our hybrid classes. So I mentioned this previously. A lot of our classes had already been taught as hybrids, meaning the lecture was online, but the lab still met face-to-face. We've been doing that for years. For most of our sciences, actually, there was a hybrid option for students to lessen the amount of time they were on campus. Some were fully online, but that was by far the minority for us. So for our hybrid classes, we continued with the lectures online, but when we started pulling students back into the classroom, we were only able to pull them back in small groups, obviously, because of social distancing. So we enacted a few things. One is that we cut the groups in half. So we would have 9 students at the most within a lab space. So a class that would have been 18 students was cut in half in group A and group B. You would have one group come for a full 3-hour lab session this week, and then the next group came the next week, and you had to supplement with, again, your digital kind of resources, digital labs, online resources to add to the experience in lab, because they were getting half the time that they would get in a normal scenario. We had other faculty that found it better to use their 3-hour lab block and have group A come for an hour and a half, group B come for the second hour and a half. So we did have some faculty that chose to do it that way. So they would still see those folks weekly. And I think different disciplines that worked better than others. It depended on what course faculty were teaching. So we were really receptive, I think, in our department. I feel, as the chair, I feel like we tried really hard to be receptive to what discipline do you teach and how can we better support your discipline regardless of, you know, it being consistent across the board. So we were flexible in that way. We also obviously did things like PPE. We put up plexiglass in spaces where we could not separate. You can see that that's one of our lab facilities on our Conway campus, where we had plexiglass made. All of those central labs have these really skinny lab tables, which were a great idea until two students sitting across from each other are not spaced out far enough. And so we struggled with that. So we had, you probably, you can see the bases of them, but they're tall plexiglass barriers that run the length of those tables. So yeah, so just a few things that we did to try and, you know, make that experience a little bit better for those students. The last thing is some feedback that we heard from students in these hybrid classes. And, you know, when you take a 3-hour lab class and you shift it down to an hour and a half, or when you take them for 3 hours and they only come every other week, they really felt that time crunch, and so did the faculty. And it was hard to distinguish between what would be better to leave out and move online. Were they really benefiting from what you were moving online versus what they were doing in the lab, what was critical? And so there were some difficulties there in kind of taking the curriculum and blending it to half the time in the lab and half the time online. And so it was difficult, to say the least. In a lot of areas, it was just difficult. Students seemed to feel rushed based on the time. We also really lost that collaborative piece that we had when we had students working in lab groups. So especially when you have, you know, Bio 101 and you're running an experiment together, you know, you're discussing the hypothesis, the prediction, you know, going through what you're going to do, what are the controlled variables, those kind of things. These students were working solo. They were flying by themselves. We had to have extra materials on hand. We actually ordered materials because, again, instead of working in a group of 4, you didn't need a setup for 4 lab groups. You needed a setup for 9 students to have their own setup to run through the entire lab, which in some areas was no big deal. Some labs was no big deal, but in physics, for example, was a big deal with certain, you know, pieces that we did not have enough of, and we had to order more equipment. The cost, obviously, for students who did the labs online and had the lab kits, they felt that additional cost. They still do feel that additional cost, but for us, we see the value in it in terms of what they're doing at home versus doing a digital lab. We felt there was value in that cost. We wish the cost was less, but we felt there was value there. We really had less complaints than we had anticipated. We had less issues than we anticipated. And overwhelmingly, I heard, you know, appreciative comments from our students and how we tried to run things. We tried to give them options. We tried to give them face-to-face hybrid options. You know, when we were doing, you know, full shutdown, clearly we didn't have face-to-face classes running, but as soon as we could, we had, in summer of 2019, Bio 102 was our first class that we actually brought back on campus, I think in July of that summer. So we were not closed, you know, for more than a few months through the end of spring and part of summer. And as soon as they allowed us to bring them back in small groups, we started doing that. So they felt like we tried to meet the needs of our students. We had synchronous online, we had online asynchronous, we had hybrid, we had face-to-face. So we did our best, and we really did get a lot of positive feedback based on that. So I think it was successful in that sense. Okay, so that is actually the end of what we have. What we'd like to do is, if you guys have questions or, you know, things you'd like to share from what your experiences were, if you were actually doing this at your institution too, you know, we're always open to suggestions.
And any questions you had on anything we did or any of the programs, feel free to ask about that too. And I've included each of our emails at the top of this slide here, so that if you think of something after this presentation's over, you can feel free to email all of us or, any particular one of us and ask, because we don't mind sharing some of the things we've kind of learned over this, or, kind of telling you the names of these programs in case you didn't catch them.
Excuse me, Christina, you mentioned kits for Chem 110. Do you recall the company you got kits for Chem 110 from?
We're using hands-on labs for Chem 110, and they will begin in August. So again, Carolina Biological, we're using for Bio 101, and hands-on labs for 110. I can tell you hands-on labs has an advantage, and that they have a digital component where students log into their website, and there's a lot more digital resources and even digital labs that goes along with students purchasing their kit that Carolina does not have. So there is that benefit to hands-on labs we found so far.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to unmute your mic and let us know.
Here we go. I'll ask a question. I'll follow my colleague here at Midlands Tech, Kitty. So we use, for AMP, we use Pearson. And we have our own videos that I haven't made, but we've made them, of the actual experiments AMP. But we use Practice Anatomy Lab pretty heavily for high quality images. And somebody already took pictures of our models, unbelievable, 15 years ago. 15 years ago. And luckily the website's still up. So, and has great practice quizzes, and they're all labeled, unlabeled, But I have filled in places where his name is Kevin Keller. I filled in with similar worksheets, and they're like models, but they got to fill them in, and then they have a version of it that they can quiz themselves. I call it anime because it's like it's animated in French, but so they have it for those. But the other thing I wanted to say is, and I do a daily, I call it housekeeping PowerPoint. It's funny, I get a lot less questions on what we covered that day. Amazing. But the other thing I noticed, and this is off topic a little bit, I had one letter or memo for students with accommodations last semester. I used to have scores of them. It's just interesting how we have no students with accommodations now. At least we don't. So I don't know.
Yeah, I've actually noticed I've had less lately of that as well. A semester or two went by before it kind of, I noticed it, like, wait a second, that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
The only thing I can attribute it to is maybe they are more hesitant to come to campus and get that paperwork done. But I actually kind of this last semester, because after a couple semesters of noticing, I'm getting less of these. It dawned on me, maybe I should mention this in class, like, hey, just a reminder, and I always start by mentioning that, but I've noticed that too. But I've kind of, again, reminding them in class or on the website a little bit more. If you need those accommodations, remember, just let us know and we'll work with you. But I think that the only thing I can attribute it to is just less people on campus. Maybe they're just not.
Maybe.
I don't know. It is strange though. I've noticed that as well.
And one last thing. I'm not a computer technician, although I live in the Apple and PC world. But I've noticed that my darling wife teaches at local high school here, Ridgeview High School. They have Chromebooks, which I don't think is a good suggestion, a good answer, but they seem to have a lot less internet issues than I have with my students, which strangely occur at test time. In fact, the
Yeah.
hour before the test is closing online. It's striking, you know.
So, yes, I have a final that's due at 11:59 tonight, so I'm waiting for those
Me
emails
too.
to roll in. But about the Chromebook, one of the things we did not mention, and I'm kind of glad you said Chromebook because it made me think, one of the things we had done to allow for testing at home was the use of a program called Remote Proctor RP Now. And I know there was a lot of complications when it came to Chromebook and that particular program. But there's other proctoring services that claim, and I'm not sure if that's how well they work, that they work better with Chromebook and tablets and things of that nature.
Yeah.
We're actually trying out a different one in fall, so I guess I'll be able to report back in a few months and tell you if that's true or not, if they do work better. But and I think Dr. Fieber's had some experience with the one we're switching to. I haven't tried it out yet, but yeah, that is probably the most frustrating thing as an online teacher is that are they really having a computer problem, or is
They're
this
probably not.
really
They're
no way
probably
to
not.
know, so you kind of just gotta go on faith sometimes if they're telling you the truth, and just, or at least, I don't know.
We
But
hope so, right?
that is a frustrating portion.
We also had the issue too, going back to the accommodations, where in some of our areas where we weren't allowed to proctor every test because RP Now had a fee associated with it. So we were actually asked to limit the number of proctored tests that we use to, 3 or 4 per class. So when you have a lecture lab together, we wanted a lab practical to be proctored, a final exam to be proctored. Then you had like one left that you could proctor one other thing. We struggled because we time restricted the other tests, a certain number of seconds per question. And then when I got the requests for accommodations, they were for time and a half. And so you have a student at home taking a test with time and a half. And so my one means of restricting use of ancillary materials went out the window. So I worked with those students in sending them to the testing center if I could, or not fully giving time and a half, giving them a little extra time, trying to kind of mitigate that a bit. And so, and thankfully our support services, student support services here were really good at kind of dealing with that, because it was a whole different situation where I couldn't give you time and still keep the security of the test, where I felt like you weren't going to use your notes, use your book as much, at least, when you were at home. So yeah, it's been a struggle for sure. The proctoring and the testing and, some of the technical issues too.
Dale, you had mentioned something about kind of giving them a heads up of what's due when. I found that when I started doing those weekly videos, they were so appreciative. Not that all of it wasn't listed on my instructor sheet that they could easily read, but there was something about those reminders that they weren't missing as many assignments week to week. So I found that super helpful too. And I had started doing that before the pandemic. And then I would always get that as a positive on my constructive criticism at the end.
Yeah, I think anything like whether it's a week-to-week video like Kristen does, or whether it's just a checklist like I do, I found that anything you can do to, group it into a week-to-week order, it helped out a lot. And I guess it's just the way they kind of work 1 week at a time. But
if that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I use the end of the semester checklist, used it for many years. And because, as you know, in this courses like ours, the end of the semester is hectic, and there's lab finals, and there's optional lab finals, and there's exam 4, which has to be given as close to the last day of class, and then sometimes the final is the next day of all things. So I use the same thing, and I've also found that we have to record all lectures, so I'm a video manager now. Every lecture I end with what's next, and that has helped too.
Yeah, that is a helpful thing. I've done some of the similar stuff, and it's it is funny that these little things that you don't think will make that huge a difference, they do.
Mhm.
Well, also too, in the weekly, you know, when you talk about weekly videos or weekly whatever, students feel that, I think is kind of a touch from you in the sense that you're supporting them on a weekly basis. And I think that kind of adds to them feeling they're connected with you and they're not just, you know, referencing back to that syllabus you gave them in the beginning, that every week you're talking to them in the sense of, these are the things I need you to focus on, whether it's text or a video, whatever. You know, I do mine with videos. I do that. I call it update videos, and I do 3-4 minutes. This is what we're doing. This is what you need to get done. You know, these are the things going on, and I just pop them on their course homepage every Monday at a certain time. You know, they know it's going to come Monday afternoon. You know, and they'll be able to see that. I also use the Remind app. I know a lot of people do that, but I'll text them, you know, weekly update videos out, you know, and I'll notice then people will hop on and watch it, you know, to figure out what's, you know, what's coming that week.
Did any of y'all do the voiceover PowerPoints with your notes? Anybody that's in this? I know Chuck was mentioning we would do that, but then we realized not many students would watch and use them. Did y'all have good success rates with that? Anybody that's in here?
The only thing I would say is they take a hell of a lot of time.
Yes.
That's what I would say. But now that we have recorded lectures where I review slides, they're sort of moot. I mean, the same thing is in the live lecture that is recorded, I guess, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
And I learned how to trim on QuickTime, and so everything. We have D2L, which I don't like. I would rather have Blackboard, by the way, but it all seems to work pretty well. And I've used Moodle, I use Canvas, I use Blackboard. So I used Moodle when I taught in North Carolina. So, but yeah, it has been a struggle, but it's certainly been more work too.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we've all noticed. I feel like online teaching is a lot more work, you know,
Yeah.
but it's a lot more work to get the same results when it's all done. It's getting near that 4:30 limit. Has anybody else got any other questions for us, or any comments or anything y'all like to share with the group?
I don't see anything in the chat, Chuck.
Okay. Well, if nobody's got anything, again, you can email us, all of us, or any particular one of us. We've got the emails right there on top. We'll be glad to help you out or answer any questions. And we appreciate all of you joining us.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
very
all.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great
I'll talk to you
afternoon.
later. Thanks.
Thank you.